I'm going to be taking you through a bit of a presentation here before I open it up for questions. We'll get to those towards a bit later. I want to start by just following up on something that Marcus said around the discovery of 1,500 or the remains of about 1,500 children that have been found in residential schools, unmarked graves across the country. And I'll tell you now that this is, I believe, the tip of the iceberg, that there are probably tens of thousands of unmarked of bodies to be found. It makes doing this work right now somewhat humbling. And I am honored to be in this profession and to be able to come and present to you today. As Marcus mentioned, I've been working in the field for a while, about 15 years. My personal pronouns, incidentally, are him and he. But this isn't my background. I'm not an HR person. I ran my own consulting shop before I joined KPMG, and I have been working primarily in the IT space. But I also have a passion around creating inclusive spaces, around making sure that we're getting the most out of our people so that they are fully engaged and fully productive so we can be as profitable as possible. And this work, I believe very strongly, is critical to the success of organizations. One thing Marcus didn't mention, I wrote a book. It's called Birds of All Feathers, Doing Diversity and Inclusion Right. It's available wherever you buy books, as long as they're selling mine. It's won some awards. It's a bestseller, not a big deal. You can find out more at my website, michaelbach.com. But why I wrote the book is an important question, because I am going to be talking about some of the stuff from the book. Like I said, I've been in the field for 15 years now, and I've read a lot of different books about diversity and inclusion. And I found that there are two types of books in diversity and inclusion. There are books that are written by academics that are amazing resources, and they explore all sorts of ideas and concepts and theories. And when you get them into a practical situation, they kind of fall apart. The ideas are great, but maybe not so great in the practical world. The other type of book are written by consultants who want to sell you something. So they'll give you enough to whet your appetite, and then they'll say, hire me and I'll help you out. I didn't want either. I wanted practical solutions, but I also wanted to give you all of the secrets. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is not necessarily rocket science, but it is something that a lot of people are still trying to get their heads around. In the case of my book, and incidentally, we are going to be giving away a few copies of the book to some of you. But in the case of my book, no matter who you are, what your role is, where you are, you can read this book and you'll have all the answers you need in terms of how to create diverse and inclusive workspaces. So let's start with some language. Start at the very beginning by defining what these words mean. Diversity, inclusion. You all came into today's presentation with your own ideas of what these words mean. Excuse me, and my definitions may or may not align with what you believe. So let's take a look here. So the first word I want to talk about is representation. You will maybe think, well, wait a second, he just said diversity and inclusion. Yes, I did. Representation is different from diversity, but it's part of it. Representation tends to focus on visible differences, such as skin color, gender, ability, other forms of visible difference. If you've ever heard of affirmative action in the United States or employment equity here in Canada, those legislations are about representation. They're not about diversity. They're about the things we can count. How many women do we have? How many people of color do we have, etc. Representation is a key element to diversity and inclusion, as it's important to ensure we have equitable representation but it's narrow in its focus on visible aspects of difference. So if that's representation, then what is diversity? Well, diversity is simply the mix. And this is a definition from a guy named Andreas Tapia, who ran a similar organization to mine in the US. And the mix is all about the facts. It's about what makes you unique. And I've always said that as soon as you have two human beings in a room, you have some form of human diversity. And that's because each of us is completely unique mix of diversity. Even if those two people look alike, talk alike, act alike, they have similar upbringings and education, even if they're identical twins, they have a unique view of the world through their lenses. And there are different mixes. You have your individual mix, your team has a mix, your department, your organization, your city, your province. All of these mixes make up the diversity around you and create the myriad of lenses through which each individual sees the world. And we get our lenses from many different sources and combinations of sources. And truthfully, in the end, you're all experts in your own diversity, but you're not experts in others' diversity because you don't know what you don't know. I'm not an expert in people living with disabilities. I'm an expert in one person living with a disability, that be me. And this is where inclusion comes in, because inclusion doesn't just happen. Where diversity is the mix, inclusion is about getting the mix to work well together. Sometimes differences, diversity, can cause conflict or uncomfortableness. And as such, inclusion must be a mindful effort to ensure that everyone feels valued, respected, and able to contribute to their fullest potential. Now, I break it down a little simpler, and I say this. Diversity is a fact. Diversity has existed since the beginning of time. Not liking diversity doesn't make it go away. I'm not particularly fond of the size of my butt right now, but that's not changing it. Apparently, I have to do something about it. Diversity exists whether you like it or not. And inclusion is a choice. And inclusion is a choice that I will argue until the day I die is good for your business. I'm not going to say it's the right thing to do. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it is good for your business. And it's okay to look at diversity and inclusion through that financial lens. Because if it's not good for your business, why are you doing it? But it is a choice. Inclusion is absolutely a choice. And in fact, our brains fight against inclusion. The way our brains work, we don't actually I'm sorry. Apparently I'm a little quiet. Let's try this. I'll just move my microphone into view. Let me know if that's better. Apparently, the way our brains work, we fight against inclusion. We don't like inclusion because it is more difficult for us because we're constantly processing that change. And I'll give you an example of how it's a choice. So one thing that newcomers, immigrants to Canada experience quite a bit is they hear, oh, well, you don't have any Canadian experience, particularly when they come to Canada with education and work experience from a different country. And it got so bad that in 2012, the Ontario Human Rights Commission issued a policy statement that said that if you were denied employment because of a lack of Canadian experience, it may be grounds for a human rights complaint. Think anything changed for immigrants? Not a thing. They just heard a different excuse. Oh, we've gone in a different direction. You don't have quite the skills we're looking for. That's assuming they got an interview at all. My husband is American. He's been in Canada about 10 years now. And he is white, able-bodied, English is his first language, and he's an accountant. So very transferable skills. And the number of interviews that he went to where he was told, oh, well, you don't have any Canadian experience. We lost count. Now, admittedly, he'd worked for companies you probably never heard of, like Sprint or H&R Block. It was amazing. But that was an example of employers choosing to be exclusionary, choosing to not be inclusive, because he absolutely had the skills to do the jobs he was applying for. But they were choosing not to be inclusive. So I've talked a bit about the broadness of diversity, and I want to give this example to show you how complex the conversation around diversity actually is. And this is a model, it's originally called the Wheel of Diversity, but to me that sounds like a game show, so we go with the dimensions of diversity. And it's from a book from 1991, and it really helps us to understand the complexity of diversity. So it starts with our personality. We all have a personality. We're born with a personality. But our personality is not set in stone. It doesn't, stop at birth. We adapt, we change, we grow based on the things that we're exposed to. The first dimension is internal dimensions. And these are things that are internal to us. So they can change and do change, but we still have them. Every single person on the planet has them in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to go around the wheel. You're going to get to know me probably far better than you ever wanted to. So my age, I'm 50. I turned 50 in February because who doesn't want to celebrate their half-century birthday in the middle of a pandemic? Place of origin, I was actually born and raised in Toronto, but I live part-time in Calgary. Introvert, extrovert, I am an extrovert on the cusp of introvert. Mental and physical ability, I live with depression. Sexual orientation, I'm super fabulous. I hope you got that when I said husband. Thinking style is linear. Race and ethnicity, I am legally one of the whitest people alive. I did my DNA test. I don't know if you've done one of those Ancestry or 23andMe tests, because I was hoping to find, the Nubian goddess in my background. Not so much. I am 98% British mutt, English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. And then I'm 2% European Jew. And I'm the only person in my family that has that. So when I told my parents, my father looked at my mother and said, "What did you do?" Like she was eating kosher meat during pregnancy, and somehow that rubbed off. It was a weird moment. I'm not going to lie. So I'm going to do sex, gender identity, and gender expression all at once because they're interrelated, but not necessarily interconnected. So my sex, I was assigned male at birth. Doctor looked down, saw penis, said boy. My gender identity, I identify as a man. And then my gender expression, I present as a man. I have a beard, my hair is short, I tend to wear clothes that are more typically masculine. That makes me what's called a cis-gendered man, C-I-S, it's Latin, essentially means same. If I was a trans man, I might have been assigned female at birth or intersex. Those are the three options, male, female, and intersex. And then I might identify as a man and then present as a man. Trans is also Latin, and it essentially means different. The whole conversation around gender identity expression, I understand, is relatively new for a lot of people. It's complex. Here's what you need to know. If you identify with the sex that you were assigned at birth, you are likely cisgendered. So that's the internal dimensions. Then we get into the external dimensions. And these are things that are external to us. They're very complicated titles. But we have a significant control over these things. And they have a significant impact on how we see and experience the world. So just going to touch on a couple of them, not going to do the whole wheel. So my communication style is direct. Religion and beliefs, I was raised Presbyterian, but I converted to Buddhism in the 90s. Caregiver responsibilities. I have 2 fur babies, Siberian Huskies, if anyone wants to know. Work experience. I have worked in a number of different fields in film and television, IT, government, and now in the nonprofit sector. Those things have a significant impact on how I see and experience the world. Then we get into our organizational dimensions. And these would be things within your own workplace, within your own organization, in my case at CCDI. And they have an impact on your experience in that organization. So my title is founder. My work location, I actually split my time between our offices in Calgary and Toronto. Management status, I'm part of the management team. And reporting structure, I report to our board of directors. That impacts how I experience the organization compared to my assistant Lucy. Because of her role, she experiences it very differently. Last but not least is global dimensions. And these are things that are completely outside of your control, relatively speaking, but they impact how you see and experience the world. As an example, laws and legislation. Every province and territory has a Human Rights Commission and a Human Rights Act. Therefore, if you grew up in Canada, you will have a particular relationship with the concept of human rights in comparison to if you grew up in China or Syria. The other one I like to talk about is generational events, because every generation has events that impact an entire generation. So traditionalists, largely over 80 at this point, would talk about things like the First and Second World Wars, the Korean War. Baby boomers would talk about things like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and the lunar landing. My generation, I think about 3 really big events that impacted my generation. The Challenger destruction of 1986, Princess Diana's death in 1997, and of course the events of 9/11 in 2001. Millennials would talk about 9/11 if they're old enough to remember it. There's a whole age component to this. Never knowing the world without the internet, and also the economic slowdown of 2008. The next generation, they're called Generation Z or the I generation. Up there, about 16 to 25 now. We don't know necessarily what those generational events will be, but I think it'll be something like TikTok goes offline for a day and they're just staring at their phones doing strange dances for no apparent reason. I'm totally kidding, obviously. COVID is a generational event. And in fact, it's a generational event that's not only impacting one generation, but every generation. Almost every single human being on the planet is being impacted by COVID-19 right now. And we have no idea what the long-term effects of this pandemic are going to be. So now what I'd like you to do is a little thinking. I'm going to put that chart back up on the screen, and I want you to pick one word, one characteristic from any of the 4 dimensions. And I want you to think about who you are, how you define yourself as a person. And I just want you to think about it for a second. Let me put that back up. I want you to think about who you are. And specifically, I just want you to pick one thing. I'll give you a minute to do that. Don't worry, I'm not going to call on anyone or anything like that. Just give you another 30 seconds. So, what did you pick? And feel free, if you'd like, you're welcome to share your answer in the chat box. Were you drawn to an internal dimension like ability or race and ethnicity? Did you pick something external like education or caregiver responsibilities? Or maybe it was more about your work, about your profession, about your work location. How is it for you when I asked you just to pick one thing? Did you have trouble? Possibly. The reality is we are all made up of a lot of different parts. We are not one-dimensional creatures. So as you saw, as I was going around the different dimensions, there's a lot of stuff up here. And all of these things make you who you are. And the important message here is we are all diverse. Everyone is diverse in some way, shape, or form. Because when you look up the word diversity, it means different, and that's it. It doesn't mean different from. It just means different. So if diversity is about difference, then we're all different from one another. And that includes straight, white, able-bodied men. You are diverse. Welcome to the club. I recognize that some people are going, wait a second. The difference that terms that we should bring into conversation here are things like underrepresentation and marginalization. I'm not saying for a second that straight, white, able-bodied men are somehow marginalized or underrepresented at this point in time. But at the same time, I believe very strongly we all have to be part of this conversation. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is create spaces, in this case workplaces, where people can come to work and do their jobs and be successful. And we are not in a position to turn away talent. The other thing that I like to point out here is the difference between how we define ourselves and how others define us. Because oftentimes, those two things are not aligned. People always define me by my profession. I'm that diversity guy. Admittedly, my social media handles used to be diversity dude, so I got a lot of that. But when I look at this list, if I have to pick one thing, I am not picking my profession because there's so much more to me. This is a complex conversation, and it's important to remember that how others define us is not necessarily how we define ourselves. So as part of this presentation, I want to cover a chapter in my book, chapter 3, which is called The Business Case, which I believe is one of, if not the most important part of the diversity and inclusion journey. What that chapter covers is the importance of the why. Why does diversity and inclusion matter? Why has it been so important for, say, President Biden to have the most diverse cabinet in the history of the country? We've seen this in Prime Minister Trudeau. Say what you will, we don't need to go there. It's about talent. But why does it matter to you? And I want to look at this through the wonderful world of Goldfish. Now, stay with me. It will all make sense when I'm done. So this is a fishbowl, and this is a goldfish. Goldfish are part of the carp family and have been around since the Song dynasty of 960 AD to 1279 AD, which is when people started keeping what we now call goldfish in outdoor ponds and winter gardens. On occasion, when there was a particularly beautiful specimen, it would be put on display indoors in a small container, just like this one. Goldfish are the most common fish raised in captivity. While goldfish can be larger or smaller depending on the size of their container and can have varying characteristics, they are genetically pretty much all the same. Now imagine you're a goldfish and you're in a fishbowl with multiple fish. You'd look around and you'd see a lot of fish that look exactly like you. You wouldn't feel different. You wouldn't feel out of place. You'd feel like you belong. The other fish would play with you. They'd invite you to their parties. They would include you. But imagine if you had a secret. Imagine you were actually a turquoise fish. All of a sudden, you're the only one. You're different. Imagine how you'd feel if you were Tammy. I've named her Tammy, as in Tammy Turquoise. Imagine how lonely you might feel. Imagine what it would be like to be that different. The reality is that we're all different. And sometimes those differences are subtle, and sometimes they're obvious. Sometimes those differences are hidden. Think about things like sexuality, gender identity, ability, sometimes race and ethnicity, indigeneity. Those aren't necessarily things we can see, but it's still there. And all that we're trying to achieve is having a fishbowl where we can go to work, do our jobs, and be successful and not be excluded because of something that we can't change. Not because it's the right thing to do. I get really cranky when I hear this language. It's the right thing to do. This isn't clear cut as right and wrong. Raise your hand if you woke up this morning and decided you were going to do the wrong thing. No, of course not. You're not Mitch McConnell. Sorry, one American joke. I just need to get it in a day. When we say it's the right thing to do, it assumes that we all understand that it is the right thing to do. It also assumes that we agree it's the right thing to do. And the reality is, we're not in agreement on that. We are in no way in an agreement that diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do. If we were, women would not make 76 cents on the dollar for doing the same job as a man. If we were, a family of Muslim people wouldn't have been mowed down in London, Ontario a few weeks ago. Saying it's the right thing to do assumes we have a collective sense of morals and values. And we don't. We do not have a collective sense of morals and values in this country. Again, if we did, we would not have a penal system because no one would commit crime. We would not have homelessness. We would not have hunger. That's a utopia. I don't say that diversity thing is the right thing to do. I say it's the smart thing to do for your business. Whatever your business is, large or small, local or international, public or private, doesn't matter. It's the smart thing to do because it's about creating space where you can get the most out of your people. So let's talk about the business case and specifically the way you create a business case. There are multiple models that you can use around a business case, but the sole purpose is that it needs to answer the question, why? Why does it matter? Why are we spending money on it? Why is this more important than anything else? And there are a variety of sections you can include in your business case. So executive summary, just be very aware that people have the attention span of goldfish, pun intended. Keep it simple, make them want to read the rest of the document. The executive summary should just give a brief summation of what you're going to talk about in the document. Scope, context, definitions, clarify some terminology, and outline key concepts. Just make sure when people are going to read the document that they're going to get what you're trying to talk about. A situational analysis. What's the problem you're trying to solve for? And it can be very simple. We're losing out on talent. Our people are not reflective of our community. Whatever. Doesn't need to be complicated. Organizational impacts. What's the risk of doing nothing and the reward of taking action? SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So looking again through that lens of what happens if we do nothing, what happens if we take action. And then legal framework. So are there any laws that you need to be worried about, anything you need to be in compliance with? And when you think about your business case, there are 5 potential key components that can be part of it. Pillars, if you will. Think of them as like legs of a chair. Although a chair with 5 legs would just be weird, but maybe call it a stool. Anyway, so people, obviously, who you hire, who you promote, who you retain. So, until our robot overlords tire of us, we still hire people no matter what it is. Customers, who do you do business with? And everyone has a customer. The City of Medicine Hat's customer is the residents of Medicine Hat. A hospital, AHS's customer is a patient. A school's customer is a student. Everyone has a customer in some way, shape, or form. Then your brand. How are you known? And I'm not talking just about your logo. I'm talking about how are you actually perceived in the market? Are you known to be an inclusive employer? Are you known to be an inclusive supplier? Or are you known to be an exclusionary supplier or an employer? The other 2 are suppliers and compliance. And I generally don't talk about these 2. 1, compliance isn't optional. You don't really have a choice. If there is a law, you have to comply with it. And quite honestly, our laws around diversity and inclusion in Canada are so woefully lacking that if all you're doing is being in compliance with the legislation, you're not actually doing diversity and inclusion. And supplier diversity is a very complex topic. I don't really see a lot of employers in Canada that are actually focused on supplier diversity. There's a couple, but it's pretty weak. Supplier diversity, just for everyone's knowledge, is essentially you establish a percentage of your spend. So the 10% of the money you're going to spend on suppliers, and you're going to specifically buy from businesses that are owned by women or owned by people of color or indigenous peoples, etc. It's a pretty advanced topic. So I tend to focus just on these 3, your people. It's all about talent. It's all about who you hire, who you retain, who you promote, who you fire. And the reality is that we are living in this wild world around talent that, if you're running a restaurant, you'd expect, I thought this, I said this, a year ago. I was like, oh yeah, if you're a restaurant owner coming across a waiter, you can't swing a cat without hitting a server or a bartender. That apparently is not the case, because a lot of these people that were in these food service jobs have gone and taken the time to reskill themselves, and they're now getting jobs in different fields. And we have a shortage of people in the food service industry. We are in a very strange moment in time around people. And as employers, your job should always be to get the best talent, regardless of what they look like, and keep them as long as they can, as long as they're good at their jobs. And the reality is, though, that people come in different shapes and sizes, and they come in different packages. And you need to be inclusive of all potential talent. And I would say the other caveat here, and I've got a minute to cover this, it needs to be reflective of Medicine Hat. It doesn't matter what's going on in Lethbridge or Calgary or Drumheller or wherever in the rest of the province or in the rest of the country. What does Medicine Hat look like? Because essentially that's where you're going to hire mostly from. Maybe you hire from some of the, like Brooks or some of the close by communities, but for the most part, you hire from the Medicine Hat area. So your people, the people you hire, should be reflective of that community. Next is your customers. And who are your customers? Are you attractive to people who are not necessarily traditionally who your customer is? Let me give you an example. Let's say you're the Calgary Flames. And if you look at the audience of people that go to hockey or are hockey fans, myself included, it is predominantly white. But we bring in anywhere between 300 and now 415,000 newcomers a year. And they're predominantly coming from countries like China, India, and the Philippines, where hockey is not that big a sport. If you do the math, if we're not engaging newcomers in the sport of hockey, then we run the risk of having no audience or not a large enough audience to support the Calgary Flames. You have to understand who your audience is and who your audience could be. Third is your brand, and that connects back to your customer and your people because it's about how you're known in the community. It's about how you're known. Are you an inclusive employer? Are you an inclusive supplier? It's not necessarily about your logo and, how things look, but if I go to your website, am I going to see myself in your website? And that's an important factor. So I just want to leave you with 3 key things to remember as it comes to your business case, and then I'm happy to open it up to questions. First, keep it short and simple. People have the attention span of goldfish. I already said that once today. Your business case does not need to be 30 pages long. 2 pages, plenty. Remember, you're just answering one question. Why does it matter? So keep it very short and simple. Second is to make it organizationally specific. It needs to speak the language of your organization. I could give you the business case for TD, but if you are not a large international bank, that business case may not have relevance. It needs to speak the language of your organization. Lastly, make sure you include data, research, and fact. What's the problem you're trying to solve for? What does the data tell you? If you think, we need to, recruit more women. Well, how many women do you have? And what level of the organization? You already have that data. The labor laws in Alberta require you to collect that information when you hire people. So you already have that data. Do a bit of an analysis to determine if you actually have gaps. Make sure that you're filling your business case with research and data and facts, as opposed to saying it's the right thing to do. As opposed to saying, oh yeah, we need to hire more women, without basing that on anything. Your business case is your starting point for your journey around diversity and inclusion. It is what you use to prove to everyone in your organization that diversity is good for business. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Why don't I stop sharing so we can see each other? You can drop your questions into the chat box. And there's the chat box. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Michael, thank you so much for your presentation on behalf of the Medicine Hat and District Chamber of Commerce, our board and our team. I think you've provided us so much insight and with amazing humor and charm. I know our team certainly appreciated the humor that you added in all of the different aspects and elements. So thank you. There's, I think one of the key pieces, of course, is that we should also be looking at hiring the best person for the job. And you stated that, and absolutely. And highlighting that business case, which I know so many of our members appreciate, looking at our people, our brand, and our customers, keeping it simple, which is always great, and looking at that organization data and research. In the very beginning, you talked about that role pronoun. And I think, you know, we've seen that more and more. And so I appreciate that. And certainly, you know, when I looked into it and people have the opportunity, there's so much information out there now. They're really taking away the guesswork for each of us. So when you put your pronoun, it's a way of indicating how people want to be referred to. So I think, you know, for anybody who's still wondering about that or hasn't kind of taken a look at what that means, I think it's a really good opportunity to look at those role pronouns. I really appreciated the difference between the representation and diversity and defining that, because I think oftentimes we look at representation, but we don't look at necessarily what that means in the context of diversity. So looking at all of those components. So thank you for that. And I also appreciated, you know, looking at diversity. So diversity being a fact, where inclusion is a choice, and it's the smart choice to make. And the 4 personality dimensions, I think, internal, external, the organization, and the global dimension. Brooke Hawker put in the chat, and I agree with her, it's hard to choose one. We are not, and I think that highlights, we're not one-dimensional people. We're not one-dimensional in our elements. And as humans, we are very much multi-dimensional, and you created such a great picture of that, and how we should never limit how we identify ourselves. So thank you. It's great to reflect. And I think part of, you know, my process as I was listening to you is reconsidering our own elevator pitches and how we introduce ourselves, because we often associate ourselves with our role. And so for our members, for you, Michael, I'm a 42-year-old female, born in Medicine Hat, but lived in both Alberta and Saskatchewan with German, Norwegian, and Russian heritage. I live in a blended family with 3 children and 2 fur babies. I love the mountains, hiking, biking, cooking, baking. And I sometimes even make errors and spelling mistakes when posting in a Zoom chat because it doesn't have spell check. I've been the executive director of our chamber for 12 years and self-proclaimed community builder throughout my life in various roles that I have had the benefit and blessing of being in. So thank you, Michael. There was a question in the chat. Again, I encourage anybody to post in the chat if they do have questions, or you can message me directly too. But do you have suggestions on how to handle clients that exhibit racism, bigotry, and prejudice?
It's a challenging question. And it's reminding me of a situation that I had to deal with a number of years ago at KPMG, where we had a small client, family-owned business, and politely they were just racists. And the auditor that we had sent in to manage the file was of South Asian descent. And she came back to us and said, this is the things they were saying to me, and they were making comments, and they were making her feel uncomfortable. And in the end, we had to have a chat with the client. In the end, actually, what happened is we fired the client. You have a responsibility as employers to ensure your employees are safe. And if you are putting them in hostile environments, you are liable for that. Sometimes you have to fire the client, and this is where your values should come into play. And I'm a big believer in value statements and making sure you understand what are the values of the organization? So if you, as an example, if one of your values is we respect the individual, you live by that. And not everyone, particularly when you begin on a journey around diversity and inclusion, not everyone's going to be behind that. There are going to be people who take a great deal of offense to that, who feel threatened by that. And it is sometimes okay to fire the client. You have to sort of assess the situation. What was the issue? Talk to the person, have a conversation. Let them know that it's not okay in your environment to be expressing racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, bigoted opinions. And put that out there and then give them the opportunity to change their behavior. In some instances they will, and in some they won't. And just as we don't serve people in restaurants who aren't wearing shirts or shoes. That's the saying, right? No shirt, no shoes, no service. Then why is it okay for you to be serving a customer that is making inappropriate comments? If you, and I don't know, I must be hungry because I'm talking about restaurants. If you have a customer that touches a server inappropriately without asking, without permission, what do you do with that customer? Because they've just assaulted your server. You kick the customer out. You don't let them come back. It's the same case in any environment that it's about creating that safe environment and being respectful. I find more often than not, most people will alter their behavior. That if you raise the matter and say, listen, that was really inappropriate, and here's why. If you want to be in this space, we're going to ask that you not express those opinions. You're not asking them to change their opinions. You can't, there's no way to get someone to change their opinion that quickly. But raise the issue, give them the opportunity to change. And if they don't, hasta mañana. Thanks for the question. It's a good one.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I get further to that, how do we build a more inclusive community overall? So we can take initial steps as individuals and as businesses, but how do we extend that and ensure that we can create more of that inclusivity on a community and a broader perspective?
Yeah. I think communities have a real opportunity and frankly, a need to adjust. I grew up in Toronto, and say what you will about it. It is just as an awful place as you think it is. No, it's not. But I grew up around a lot of diversity, and diversity was sort of thrust upon this city. Smaller communities are figuring out how to adapt to change. And there's lots of things you can do. Like, do you have I know you do, an immigrant serving agency? Where's the opportunity to engage with that agency around the inclusion of newcomers? Communities like Medicine Hat don't grow without newcomers. It's not going to work without the newcomer population. I'm thinking about, I think it's Nova Scotia's numbers, or maybe Newfoundland, one of them. Anyway, they have more out migration, meaning people, it's Newfoundland, meaning leaving the province, than they do coming into the province. And the people who are coming into the province are coming there to retire, which means that they're in population decline from a workplace perspective. They need to be more attractive to newcomers. Whether that's newcomers, whether it's LGBTQ2 plus peoples, people living with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, I think a little information goes a long way. about getting to know the population through education. And education does not have to be an hour with Michael Bach, although super fun. It can be as simple as like a poster campaign or emails or, you know, community events where you create space for people to get to know one another. Mentoring programs. Ultimately, we as human beings all want the same thing. We want safety. We want our basic needs met through housing, food, work. It's not that complicated. And what I find is that when you get to know a person on a personal level and learn about their experiences, it really changes you. And I'll just tell you one quick story. My life was changed a number of years ago when I had the opportunity to mentor a new Canadian. So I believed in my heart that if you came to Canada and you worked hard, you would succeed. I believed that. And then I got to meet a guy named Numan, who was from Pakistan. And Numan spoke perfect English. He went to a university in the US, and he wanted to be a recruiter, which is not a job that requires you to have special certifications or education. Like it's not like a lawyer or a doctor. And he came to Canada and came to Toronto, and his goal was to find a job so he could bring over his wife and newborn child. And he said, "Oh, I can't get a job interview. No one will call me back." I thought, come on. So I looked at his resume. Resume looked good. I brought him into and I genuinely thought he was not doing anything. So I brought him into my office and I said, gave him a computer and a desk, had him apply to a bunch of HR jobs. I said, you apply to the job and then you tell me who the company is and I will call the head of HR, most of whom I knew. And I will make sure that someone looks at your resume. That's all I can promise, is that someone will put their eyes on your resume. Because of course the recruiting process is like a black hole in some of these companies. And he applied for about 20 jobs over the course of the week. And every single one said to me, well, he doesn't have any Canadian experience. What? That's not a thing. We don't do that. We do that in commercials. No, it's a real thing. My point being that I got to know somebody very well, and I made it kind of my cause to get him a job. He now lives and works in the province of Alberta, in Edmonton. But it was about me opening myself up, getting to know another person. I now have a wonderful fascination with newcomers, because I think anybody who willingly moves to this ice rock of a country, although not currently where it's on fire, we need to support them, not because it's the right thing to do, because it's the right thing to do for Canada. Because if people can come to Canada and work in their chosen profession, they can make more money, which means they can pay more taxes, they can spend more money in communities. We all benefit from that. But if newcomers are, in survival jobs and they've got a lot more experience than I do, then it's just not good for Canada.
Michael, I just wanted to touch on, you had mentioned immigration services. We actually have, Samus Immigration is one here in Medicine Hat, and actually two of their staff, I believe, actually are on this call. I think I still see you on here. Are you on here, Jane? I'm pretty sure I've seen the two of them. I can always get you guys in touch too with them. Are you there, Jane?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
So we can put you in touch with anyone at Samus Immigration too, if you guys need any of that contact information.
Great.
Chantal, I'm here. I'm not sure if Jane left the call, but I'm still here.
Oh, we got another one. Hello.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Chantal. Chantal's our membership services manager. So if you need contacts or resources, she's a great connection point for our members here in our community. Unplanned, so I apologize to my team. but I would love to get a picture of the diverse range of people on this call. I am wondering for those of you who are comfortable, who perhaps aren't in your pajamas at home, if you could turn on your video camera, and we'll take a quick screenshot of all of your beautiful faces, because I do think it represents diversity within our community. And to those that may not have camera access, I completely understand, because I know that's still a challenge even 16 months into this, that not everybody has a webcam necessarily either. So I'll give a couple more seconds. And Michael, I know, you mentioned Toronto. I had the benefit of being born in Medicine Hat, and I'll just wait until maybe we can get a few more cameras on. Had the benefit of being born in Medicine Hat, but moved to Calgary when I was a year old. And I think I was the visible minority in the school I went to in elementary school. And then we moved when I was 12 years old to a small community in Saskatchewan, and very different, in terms of the dynamics from a large center to a smaller community. So, well, I think we have that. So I'm just going to ask one of the members of our team to take a screenshot. Show us your beautiful smiles. And thank you. We're good to go. Okay. Thank you for participating in that. We are back in the office. There's a few of us that have virtual backgrounds, but if you would like to connect with us, our team is back in the office once again, and we're so thankful that we can connect together again. So you can certainly email, call to book an appointment if you'd like to meet with any of our team members, or give us a call. We are also excited about our fall event schedule lineup. We are going to be doing our election forum in a different format, so you won't see it in the same format in a theater, but we will be launching that on October 4th, so stay tuned. We are also, government restrictions permitting, we're very excited to announce that our 2021 Business Awards celebrating the hero within will be held in person with some virtual options for those that can't attend. So I know that's something that our board has been and our team and our community has been very excited about in terms of reconnecting. It's a very social community, and very much we enjoy our face-to-face, and speaking for myself, I appreciate all the hugs. So looking forward to that in the fall, and truly celebrating the hero within each one of us and within our business community. So stay tuned. You can start to mark your calendars, and Kristen will correct me if I'm wrong, but we have it set for Small Business Week, which is October 22nd. So you can save the date. It's going to be a little bit different too than what you're used to, and we are super excited to host this for our community. We're also going to be holding our leadership breakfast and our president's reception and AGM. The plan is in person for those as well. And those do take place in November. So stay tuned for those dates. Once they're on our website, you can always go to www.medicinehatchamber.com. So thank you again, Michael. You did an outstanding job in keeping us all engaged and interested. Lots of resources. If people want to get in touch with you, Michael, perhaps you can just post your information, contact information again in the chat. I know that Kristen's already got it on her radar in terms of sending the information out or follow-up email out. And there is a survey as well, which Kristen has posted in the chat. So a special thanks to our team here at the Chamber. I take no credit for any of it. This is all them. I just show up and get to say a few words, and they are truly stellar and have been doing all the great work in the background. Michael, thank you again. Thank you to each one of you for taking your noon hour to join us. Take care and have an amazing week. Try to stay cool out there.
Thanks all. Take care.